Hello, my name is Aaron Murphy, and welcome to the West Shore Archive. Today's guest is Testing Coordinator Dr. Maria Hedrick. Prior to the 2023-2024 school year, Dr. Hedrick had been West Shore's longtime AP Statistics teacher. Dr. Hedrick is the highest educated teacher at West Shore. She has a rich history in math education and a unique background. Please welcome Dr. Hedrick. So, Dr. Hedrick, where did you grow up?
I grew up in Wilmington, North Carolina.
What year were you born?
I was born in '67. I'm showing my age.
You don't look. You're
56.
3 years. You're 3 years younger than my mom.
Okay, yeah, 56. We're getting on. We're moving on up there.
Mm-hmm. So, where did you go to high school?
John T. Hoggard High School in Wilmington.
And what would you say like your favorite subject class was?
Math, of course.
Yeah.
My senior year in high school, my junior year in high school, I had a teacher, Mrs. Jean Taylor. I absolutely loved this lady. I had her for pre-cal. And then I got her senior year as a calc teacher, and she's the one who inspired me to become a teacher. I liked math, but when I took calculus, I finally understood why we had learned everything we learned in algebra and pre-cal,
Right.
and it just clicked. I was like, oh my gosh, this is why I learned all of this. And math came pretty easily to me. My dad's an engineer. I'm actually one of 13 kids.
Oh, wow.
And so I've got like 4 or 5 brothers and sisters who are engineers. We've got an architect. There's a few of us that are teachers, you know. Actually, I have one who's a Catholic priest. So we've got a little bit of everything in there. I have one who's a lawyer. So
I was going to ask you have 13 siblings? So
12. I have 12 siblings,
okay.
so there's 13 of
So
us.
I'm assuming your parents were religious or something, because that's...
Yeah, they came over from Cuba in '59. And so we grew up, we were an anomaly because we grew up in the Bible Belt as Catholics, speaking Spanish, Cuban. So we were countercultural every way you look at it. So, yeah. I actually have more siblings than I do cousins.
Yeah. On my mom's side, that's true. So, yeah. So, how was high school different when you were a student than it is now?
The biggest difference, the technology. I noticed that last year in AP Stats, at the end of, after the students take the AP exam, I would bring in movies. I liked bringing in Moneyball because it's a real life story of how statistics was used to turn around a baseball team. And I would bring in the movie about the kids at MIT who went to Las Vegas and made a lot of money. And when I'm playing the movie, I noticed last year very few of my students were paying attention. All of them were on their phones. Yeah. And they all there was maybe 1 or 2 listening. Everyone else had their earbuds in and was doing something on their phone. And I was like, okay, that's got to be the biggest difference.
Yeah.
I mean, we had computers, but not like classroom computers. None of the teachers had computers. It's just, and now everyone has their own handheld computer.
Yeah.
So that's definitely the biggest difference.
So getting back to math, what is it about math that you found fun? Was it like the application of it, or was it more like the comfort of like solving problems and just working through problems? Because I know for me, I have a hard time in math because I don't have the context, and so I do a lot better with math in like, let's say, chemistry or something.
Right. What I liked about math is the bigger picture. If I could see the bigger picture, I didn't have to memorize. I mean, if I knew what it was that I was doing, then I didn't have to worry about memorization. And if I took biology, it was all memorization, and I hated the memorization part. And even when I taught it to my students, I always tried to show them the big picture, because if you know the big picture, you don't have as much memorization.
Right. And
I'm not a memorizing person. I will when I have to, but if you can see the patterns, then you don't have to do the memorization.
Right. So did you know you wanted to be a teacher in high school, or what did you know you wanted to do?
When I graduated high school, I was thinking computer science, computer engineering. So I went to NC State University, which is the huge engineering school in North Carolina.
Yeah.
And while I was there, I worked a couple of summers with the Corps of Engineers, and I was in front of a computer all day, and I thought, I can't do this.
Right.
I need more people interaction. So that's when I switched to teaching. I've never regretted switching to teaching. There's been stuff in teaching that's driven me crazy, but I've never regretted changing. So
Right.
to me, it was my vocation. It was what I was meant to do.
So what do you get your bachelor's in?
My bachelor's is math education.
Right.
So we had the equivalents to a pure math degree and an education degree because it was an engineering school, and they wanted to make sure if you got out, you knew the material, the math material.
Right. And I understand you have a master's as well.
I got a PhD. Yeah,
Well,
I got both.
Did you get a bachelor's, master's, then a PhD? Or?
Yeah, I did my bachelor's, I graduated, and then I taught for 1 year in one county. It was one of the poorest counties in North Carolina.
Oh.
And after doing that for a year, I had a lot of students who just did not want to be there. So I applied at another school and moved, and that school was about 30 minutes from University of North Carolina at Pembroke, which is a really small school. I think it's gotten bigger now, but it was it was a school for Lumbee Indians, and most people have never heard of the Lumbee tribe. They did not want to be recognized as a national tribe because they did not want to be put on a reservation.
Right.
So I ended up at UNC Pembroke doing classes at night to do a master's. Did that for 2.5 years, got my master's. And then I was thinking, I probably should go do a PhD. I was getting burned out. I'd been teaching for 6 years, and I was starting to get burned out. So I was thinking, do I want to do something else? And I thought, well, I'll do a PhD and go work at the university.
Right.
So I went back to NC State. I did 2 years there. And while I was doing my classes, in order to pay for my classes, because in education, obviously, you don't get paid enough to pay back student loans. So they gave me an assistantship, which paid for my courses and my living expenses. And then I taught classes on campus. I taught college algebra on campus. And then halfway through, got married, and my husband moved down to Florida, so I ended up moving to Florida. And they don't transfer classes when you're doing a PhD, so I started brand new at UCF.
Oh.
But it was okay because at NC State was like, you're going to do enough math classes so that when you graduate, you can teach math or education at any university. Well, then I get to UCF, and they're like, you're going to teach, you took all math classes, you need education classes. So I ended up with both.
Right.
And then halfway through my PhD program, I got pregnant and had Tony. And so I thought, well, I don't want to work 60, 70 hours a week, which is what you have to do to get tenured at the university.
Oh, that's a lot.
So I said, yeah, I'm not going to do it. So then when I graduated, I started looking, and West Shore had a position. So that's how I ended up here with Dr. Galbraith.
Where were you living when you were getting your PhD?
I lived here in Melbourne.
Right.
So my husband was working at L3 Harris, which was just Harris back then, and then I was commuting back and forth. And I did the same thing at UCF that I had done at NC State. They gave me an assistantship. So I taught some of their classes. I taught some of their education classes for teachers, students who were going to be math teachers. And I just commuted back and forth. I usually had classes either Monday, Wednesday, or Tuesday, Thursday, so I only went 2 or 3 times a week.
So would you say since you've been through so much schooling, would you say you like being a student? Is that an experience you like, or?
Yeah, I liked learning. I still like learning. That's one thing. Yes, I've always enjoyed learning, which is one of the things I've liked about West Shore, is they've given me the opportunity to teach all kinds of things which I did not have that opportunity at other schools I was at. So yes, I do like the learning part of it.
Right. So your first teaching job was at that school that was
in Wadesboro, North Carolina, Anson County. Anson County High School.
So you didn't like that job?
Well, I had some good students. It was a county that was primarily minorities, and I would have students that I'd tell them, you got to do the work. You're capable, and the students would be like, no, I don't. this coach is going to get me a football scholarship.
Right.
And I would have students that would get the SAT and they'd get a score of 600, and they thought that the coach was going to get them, 600 with both combined.
Yeah.
And they thought they were going to get a scholarship. I'm like, you're never going to get a scholarship like that.
Mm-hmm.
But I also had some amazing kids. I remember there were 2 African American girls that I absolutely loved. And I just told them, stay away from the boys, because they had a high pregnancy rate, and the girls would get pregnant. And this was back in the 90s.
Yeah.
And then they didn't go anywhere. And so when I was at UNC Pembroke, I ran into one of the students a few years later, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm so glad you got out and you're getting your education. I'm like, where's your friend? She said, she got pregnant. I was like, ah. So, there were some great kids there,
Mm-hmm.
and there were kids who did some amazing things, but it was just getting them to stay on track, you know, and having the support from home, the same support at home that they were getting at school.
Mm-hmm. So, what year did you start teaching at West Shore?
I came in 2001.
2001.
And I always remember that because I came in with Mr. Schledorn, and we were right next door to each other, and September 11th
Yeah, he told
happened
me about
like 2 months after we started, like a month and a half. So I'll never forget when I started, just because of that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was going to ask, how do you get your job? But you had a PhD by then, so I'm pretty sure they were...
Well, the interesting thing is, when I was going into the schools doing my research, West Shore had only been here a year or 2.
Yeah.
So I went online and I looked up the high schools, and I didn't see West Shore. I didn't know anything, so I went through some of the high schools. I remember going to Palm Bay, Mel High, Rockledge, Merritt Island, Cocoa Beach, and then I went to Satellite.
Mm-hmm.
And the assistant principal at Satellite, James Hickey, was an NC State graduate. So we hit it off, and he was like, oh my gosh, you got to come here to Satellite to teach. We want you here. I'm going to hire you. And okay. But then somebody in the community said, well, have you been to West Shore? And I was like, I don't know what you're talking about. So then I looked it up, and I was like, oh. So I came into West Shore. I brought in my research, and then my father-in-law passed away. And I could not come in and do the research, and the department chair, who was Susan Krebs at the time, said, we'll do it for you. My math teachers will do it for you. I was like, oh my gosh. And they did. They did a phenomenal job. And I was just blown away by how nice everyone was, and how everyone like bended over backwards to do my research that I had gone into the other schools to do. So that summer, I put in an application, and Rita Galbraith calls me immediately. And so I come in and interview, and she tells me, she says, I'm going to hire you for this job, but I can't do it legally without interviewing everybody else on the list. She says, so let me go through and interview them. If you're telling me you're going to take the job, I'm letting you know it's yours, but I can't legally tell you that yet. And then she told me she was working on a PhD as well. I did not have my PhD then. I didn't get it till December of that year, because I still had to defend my dissertation. Everything was done. All the paperwork, everything was done, but I still had to do my actual defense in front of my committee. So she told me she was working on a PhD at the same time. She said, I would love to have a PhD at the school. So, so that's how I ended up getting the job.
So you said West Shore teachers helped you with the research. What were you researching?
I was researching motivation in the Algebra 1 classroom. And so one of the professors that I had at University of Central Florida, Dr. Connolly, I don't remember his first name, but he had graduated from the University of California, San Diego, before he came to teach at UCF. And he had used the research of a man named Dr. Richard Clark from the University of San Diego. And he had tested it in a science classroom, because Dr. Conley was a science teacher. And when I was looking for what I was going to do, he told me what he had done, motivation in science classroom. And I said, well, I'll do that in Algebra 1 classrooms. And so after I did it, I know that there was another student that was looking at computer science classrooms. So the cool thing is, several of us were doing it in different subject areas, and all of the research that we were doing was going back to Dr. Richard Clark.
Yeah.
So the cool thing was the model that he had developed, it was the CANE model. I don't remember what the CANE model stands for, but he, based on all of the research that we did, his model's is fluid and has been changing. So I thought that was kind of cool.
That is cool.
That I was instrumental in something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So if you go to UCF and you go to where all the dissertations are, mine's in there somewhere.
Yeah, that's cool. So what classes were you teaching when you first got here?
So I started out teaching Algebra 1 Honors, Algebra 2 Honors, and College Algebra Trig. And then within 6 weeks, I was here 6 weeks, and Rita Galbraith calls me down to her office, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, what did I do wrong? So I go down to her office, and Rita Galbraith is one of the most amazing principals I've ever worked under. And Barbara Rodriguez was the assistant principal, another absolutely amazing assistant principal. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, what is about to happen? And Rita Galbraith looks at me and she says, we need you to teach AP Calc. All right, Tony is a year and a half, almost 2. He's probably closer to 2 than a year and a half.
Yeah.
And I just looked at her. I said, okay, my son is almost 2. I said, I've got Algebra 2 Honors, Algebra 1 Honors, College Algebra and Trig, and you're going to give me a 4th prep? I said, there's no way. There's just no way I can do that. So she said, we're going to take away your Algebra 2 Honors. Well, the nice thing, Algebra 1 Honors I can teach in my sleep because I've been teaching Algebra 1 for a long time.
Yeah.
So the College Algebra Trig was a little bit different, but not too bad either. So she said, you've had more math classes than any teacher here. We need you to teach it. Susan Krebs they had adopted a baby, so she was going to stay home. So she was quitting. So that's why they were moving me. I was like, okay, you don't tell Rita Galbraith no. So like I said, that's where I had the opportunity. That was my first and only opportunity I've had to teach Calc, and I loved it. I mean, it was great. So, yeah.
And did you teach it the next year, or was it just that
I did
year?
not. I did not because I got pregnant that year, and so I turned in my resignation. I told Rita, I said, I can't put 2 kids in daycare. I'm just not going to do it. It's just too much. So then I resigned, and then we found out in the summer that my baby had a birth defect. Her kidneys never developed.
Right.
So I came back in June, and I saw Rita, and I said, have you hired my position yet? She said, no. She said, we have, we've advertised it, but she said, I haven't interviewed. I said, well, don't, because I'm coming back. And so when I explained to her, Rita said to me she had lost her second baby as well. And I'll never forget, she looked at me and she said, when you get pregnant again, we're going to be here for you too. So it just melted my heart.
Yeah.
It really did. So the next year, I ended up having a little girl, Catalina, and since her kidneys never developed, her lungs never developed, so she died like an hour after birth. So I took the 6 weeks off, the pregnancy, and then coming back was good. It was therapeutic for me. And, you know, it was what it was. It was hard, but it's been 21 years ago, so, you know. So I did give up the calculus. That's when Mrs. Neri took it. And Rita told me, she said, now, if you give up the calculus, you may never get it back.
Yeah.
And I said, that's okay. I said, I can't be away from my kids for 6 weeks and expect them to do well on the AP Calc exam.
Yeah.
So, but like I said, I had the opportunity to teach the Calc. So then when I came back the next year, they're like, oh, we want to teach AP Statistics. AP Statistics was started in 1997. Calc's been around, AP Calc's been around since the 60s or 50s or 60s. Right. So Stats was a new AP, and of course they looked at me and said, we want you to teach it. And I was like, okay, why not? So then I taught that, and then got pregnant the next year and gave it up and had Abby. And then when I came back, I was going to quit. That was the year that Mr. Fleming was coming in. Rita Galbraith retired, and Barbara Rodriguez went to Delora. And so we just had Claudia Shirley. I had Abby, and I turned in my resignation, and she was like, you can't resign. She said, we can't lose you too. She said, we're already hiring a principal and assistant principal. She said, what do we need to do? I said, if I can teach 3 classes and be done, just work till noon and be done. And she said, okay. She said, but I want you to teach AP Computer Science. I said, I will teach AP Computer Science as long as you give me Algebra 1 honors with it.
Right.
So I had AP Computer Science and 2 Algebra 1 honors classes, and I did that for a year. And then we got rid of we didn't have enough interest for computer science another year. And so then she wanted me to teach computer science again, and I told her, look, I will teach computer science if you're not don't like logic. I mean, students don't know what computer science is, and if they get into the class, I had a lot of them who were like, I don't want to take this for a year. This is not what I thought it was.
Right.
So they were starting to bring in the career class for 9th grade. So I sat down with Mrs. Shirley and we developed a computer science course on the TI-84s, programming the TI-84s. And I think your older brother did that class.
Abe or Noah?
The older one, which was the oldest.
Noah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was, I remember, I believe he was in there. And we did it for 2 or 3 years, and it was coding on the TI-84s, which I would have him do something really easy, like if you got square root of 18, we wrote a program where it would simplify it and write it as 3 square root of 2. So you could put any square root in and it would simplify it. So, I mean, it's complicated because you have to go through the steps, but at least the students could see if they wanted to code or not. So a couple of years later, after we'd been teaching this class, it was just a semester class. It was before we had the virtual lab. So the students would take the career class and then take that after, or vice versa. And they had other options back then. We had keyboarding and a few other classes that they could take. So the next year, Mrs. Shirley comes up to me and says, do you want to teach? The AP statistics teacher was leaving and going to Vieira High School, Paul Bentley. So she said, do you want to teach AP stats or AP computer science? And I was like, well, that's easy, AP stats. I said, because the majority of students at West Shore can take AP stats and do well.
Yeah.
The majority of students at West Shore are not interested in computer science. So I thought, I think the stats is a little bit more user-friendly and more applied, so students see a use for it. So then that's when I got back into statistics, and then I've been teaching it now for 15 years until I gave it up to Mrs. Harry again.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Would you say back then there was less interest in computer science than there is now? Because I feel like a lot of people do it now, but...
I think adding the computer science principles has helped a lot.
Okay.
So we eliminated the course that went the TI-84, programming the TI-84, because they brought in computer science principles, which is basically the same thing, except you're programming on the computer, but at least the students are getting some coding. It's not as much coding as AP Computer Science A. So if a student takes AP Computer Science principles and thinks, okay, there's no way I want to do this, they don't sign up for AP Computer Science A where they're locked in for a year.
Right.
So.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
So going back to your education, how a lot of teachers now, they just get hired like with not an education degree, but they have a degree in like a specialty. Let's say they got like a political science degree, and so now they're teaching like government.
Yeah.
How is getting an education degree specifically, and then also a master's in education, helpful when you eventually actually start teaching?
I don't know that it is helpful. I'm gonna be perfectly honest.
Yeah.
When I left when I finished and graduated, I remember going back to Dr. Watson, who was one of my education teachers, and telling him, I didn't learn very much here.
Yeah.
I mean, the math, obviously I learned, but teaching's one of those things that you learn as you do it. I mean, the Gleasons, both of them, neither one of them has education degrees.
Yeah.
But I think they're both really good teachers because they have an interest in the students and learning how students learn. Now they're going through and doing their the backwards way of getting, because you do have to do some education classes.
Certification.
So they're doing that. I don't know that getting an education degree is the most helpful thing to me was the student teaching and actually getting out and teaching.
Yeah.
And that's why they say that the best teachers are the ones who have several years teaching under their belt, because they know after doing something for 3 or 4 times, especially in math, I know where students are going to have problems because I've taught it enough times.
Right.
So I can tell the students, okay, watch out, you're going to do this. And sure enough, on the test, they'll make those same mistakes. So,
Yeah.
like order of operations. If you've got a division sign before multiplication, you have to do the division before multiplication, but the students always want to multiply first. Yeah, but you've got to go left to right. And it's just one of those common mistakes that I know the students are going to make because I've seen it so many times.
Right. I think math is specifically more like that. I know a lot of my math teachers have a very formulaic way of teaching.
Right.
While like other teachers don't really have that.
Right.
So I think math is interesting in that way for teaching.
Right.
And then,
Well, I know when I taught AP Stats, when I gave the homeworks back, I would give them 4 or 5 points for each homework, and I would nitpick little things. I didn't check every problem because I didn't have time, but I would pick 1 or 2 problems just so the students were getting feedback, and I'd take off a half a point here and a half a point there, and I would have some students who would get very upset with me because they're like, I can never get a 5 out of 5. It's always a 4.5 out of 5. And one of my favorite examples is Everett Wong, his older sister. Did you know Everett Wong?
I did know everyone. Yeah.
His older sister, Bailey Wong, I had her, I think she's a senior at Tulane now. And she would get so mad at the little half points because she was a perfectionist. And I would tell her, I would say, and I would tell my other students this too, if I don't take this half a point, if I just correct it, you're not going to fix it. I said, but as soon as you see that minus 0.5, that gives you an emotional feeling. You get upset, you're not going to make that same mistake, so you're going to end up with a 5 on the exam. And her mother just sent me, I've known her parents for years, her mom just sent me an email last week saying that Bailey's taken another statistics course, and she was arguing with the teacher about 2 or 3 problems on the test. And the mom asked her, well, is it that it's just a lot harder than West Shore, or is it that the teacher's not good? And she's like, no, it's neither one. She said, I know that I know the material from high school stats.
Yeah.
So she argued all of her points. She ended up with 110 out of 100. She like basically blew the curve for everyone. So the mom sends it to me, and of course she's laughing about it because Bailey's such a perfectionist. But I knew those little half a points, she would interpret things the way the AP exam wanted it interpreted. And again, that comes from experience. You know, after having taught AP Stats 15 years, I knew where they were going to nitpick little things, so I could nitpick the exact same things.
Do you think being a teacher of an AP course is easier or harder than like a regular course? As in, there's like a formula and you know exactly what you need to teach students for them to do well in the exam.
It depends. I think it completely depends on the course. It is more work teaching AP.
Yeah.
It is definitely a lot more work. If I was teaching Algebra 1, the years that I taught Algebra 1 and Algebra 2 and Geometry and did not have AP, I didn't spend nearly the amount of time outside of school preparing and doing things that needed to get done. But the advantages of AP is you've got, especially at West Shore, students who really want to be in the class and really want to learn. So as a teacher, you get amazing satisfaction. And then when the AP scores come out, I'm like, okay, all of that fussing I did with the kids and all of that, come on, you can do it, you can do it. And fighting the senioritis. When the scores come back and you end up with 97, 98% who passed, I'm like, yes, okay. And then when the kids come back and tell you, I've had students who've gone to medical school and they have to take statistics because they got to be able to read these journals, and they send me an email and they're like, oh my gosh, what I learned in your high school stats class, I can explain the statistics to everybody. And the kids who didn't have high school stats have no clue what's going on. That makes me feel good because then I'm like, okay, it made a difference. And then when I hear students, I had one student who graduated and went to UCF, and she was a good kid. She wasn't like a high flyer. She wasn't like a 4.0 merit scholar or anything like that. She was an AB student, Robin Parente, and she sent me an email about 4 or 5 years ago, said she just graduated UCF. She had 5 job offers.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh my gosh. So, yeah, when you see things like that, you're like, okay,
Yeah.
I'm making a difference,
Is-
even though you don't see it every day of the year.
Right. Is that the rewarding part of teaching, the
Oh, absolutely.
students coming back? And
Absolutely. Yeah.
Is there any other part of teaching that you find rewarding?
Oh yeah, being off in the summer for 2 months.
Oh, yeah, that is nice.
Being off at Christmas. You know, I never dreamed that I would work for 20 some years. I figured I'd be a stay-at-home mom. But what I found was, since I only ended up with 2 kids, this ended up working, fitting in, and the schedule worked with my kids' schedule.
Yeah.
By me being part-time for the past 18 years, I was able to drop my kids off at school in the morning, and I could pick them up at 2:30 in the afternoon when they got done. So I felt like I had the best of both worlds.
Yeah.
And then, like, Tony was playing football, I could be sitting out there grading papers while he was practicing, or Abby had basketball games or playing softball. I could still be with them and still grading papers. All the other moms used to laugh at me because they said, "You go through red pens." I'm like, I do go through red pens, but that's what teaching is.
So, you were just doing the first 4 periods of the day for most of your time at West Shore?
Yeah, well, when Abby was little, I had her with a little old lady. She was like 78, 79 years old. She kept 3 girls in her house when Abby was there. She actually had Rhea Pell's daughter for a little bit at the same time. So I just did first, second, third period. I was 50%. So I'd come in at 8 to noon. So she just did that. Once she started in VPK and was going to school till 2, then I went up to 4, and then I was 80%, and then they wanted me here 6.4 hours. So yeah, as long as they were in school, I was like, okay, I can go do a little bit more. And then they tried to talk me into coming full time for a long time, and I was like, no, I just can't do it. I just can't do it. Plus AP statistics, there's a lot of writing.
Yeah.
And I am not a writing person, not at all. I mean, I can write a research paper. I don't enjoy it, but I can do it. So you only teaching two or three AP stats and then another math class meant that I could get papers graded pretty quickly and stuff like that.
That's what I found interesting taking stats. Is it's not even really a math class. It's more of a
interpret.
It's like a science class almost. Yeah.
Interpret what you get. And some of the students like that because they can actually see the application of it.
Yeah, I like that part of it.
Yeah. And I, I've always debated. My husband and I talk about it because he's an engineer, but he loves sports. And he's like, we should have both majored in stats. He said, I could have gone to all of these major games and just compiled the numbers and sent them to you, and you did the stats from home, and we send it into the newspapers and ESPN and everything. He's like, if we could go back and redo it. And I was like, yes and no, because then we would have missed out on other things. So,
So, how has being a mother changed how you teach, or how's it changed your outlook on teaching?
Just the perspective, especially here at West Shore, from seeing how much the students have. I tried to pare down the amount of homework I gave. They definitely needed to do homework. If students don't do math homework, they don't learn it.
Yeah.
So they definitely have to do the math. But I tried to pare it down so they weren't doing a whole lot. And if there was things going on in the school year, I tried to be cognizant of that, But I also didn't trust some of the students or the parents who would say, oh, my kid stays up till 2 o'clock every morning doing homework. I'm like, okay, there's no way they're working from 4 o'clock till 2 o'clock in the morning. I don't believe that. Because I would see my own students, and there were times that they got stressed out. I remember one time Abby skipped school because she did not have her terms and questions done for AP World. But at the same time, she had wasted a lot of time that weekend. So I did let her know. She was a 9th grader. I did let her know I was going to let her skip that school day. I said, but you will never do this again. And it was time management, so she figured it out. So some of it, yes. And I tried to give students time in class to work on homework, and I would have several students who would get, if not completely done, halfway done. So that helped. And if they needed after school, I would have students who would say, can I borrow a book or take pictures of the book? Absolutely, because some of them were here for sports, but the sports didn't start till 6 or 7, depending on.
Right.
So that would give them some time to work as well.
How is West Shore, teaching at West Shore, different than teaching at any of the other schools you taught at?
I don't really teach much differently.
No.
I teach for the students to learn. When I came to West Shore, my expectations, even when I taught at Anson County, which was a very low achieving school, I still expected my students to learn.
Yeah.
My pass rates were not very good, but it was what it was. My whole perspective was, I'm trying to get these kids to go to college.
Yeah.
If they were not on the college track, they wouldn't be taking algebra and geometry and pre-cal.
Okay.
They would have been taking some of the other classes. There was a year I taught consumer math, and when I taught consumer math, those kids were not college prep. A lot of them were going vocational schools, so I did a lot more hands-on things with them. I remember a lot of them had part-time jobs, so in January, they'd bring in their tax forms, and we filled out taxes in there.
Yeah.
We did a lot of like finance stuff. What do you need to do to be able to buy a car, and interest rates, and how much are the payments going to be, and things like that, because that was the group of kids that I had. I felt if a student was college bound, it was very important that they got certain math concepts. If they didn't, they weren't going to make it through SAT. They weren't going to score on SAT or ACT. So their opportunity to go to college was going to be greatly diminished.
Right.
So I've basically just been, I'm going to teach the material. And I don't think I really worried about the pass rate, because the kids who wanted to learn did. And I've had students come back and tell me that they blew my course off. And I was like, yeah, I know. I mean, and part of it is I've had students say, oh, you must have hated me. And I was like, no, I knew you were going to grow up eventually. I even say that about my 24-year-old son, about Tony, because he's working at Northrop now and still living at home. And I look at my husband, I'll be like, he is going to grow up one day, isn't he? And he's like, I hope so. So it's a growing process.
Right.
Some people don't see the importance of education, and I get that. My whole philosophy of education comes from my parents. I mean, they left Cuba in 1959, and everything was taken away from them.
Yeah.
And they were like, the only thing you have is your religion and your education. So they're like, you get as much of an education as you can, and you take advantage of the opportunities. So,
Right.
so I have a hard time relating to students that don't get that, and that's, I think, why I had my first year was such a struggle, because I didn't know people. I guess I didn't really know people that were not trying to move ahead.
Where are you in the family, order?
I'm right in.
Right
I'm in the middle. I'm number 6, but I'm the oldest girl. So my
girl.
mom had 5 boys.
Oh my
Then
gosh.
she had me. So there's 7 boys and 6 girls. So
because I'm from a big family, not as big as yours,
Right.
like half of yours, which is
Right.
crazy, but
still, yeah.
Yeah.
You still don't see a family that big that often.
I've never really heard of anybody over 12, so that's interesting.
One of my friends in high school was 1 to 12, and then another friend that I have up in Michigan was 1 to 12. And then I have a sister who's got 9. I have a sister who has 8. I have another one who's got 6, and then 5, and then I ended up with 2, and then I have one sister who never could get pregnant. So you just never know. You just never know what God's plan is for you.
Yep. So, growing up you were the youngest of the 5 boys before you. How was that? Because how much older were they?
Oh, we were the first 9 of us, from my oldest brother Philip to my sister Helen, were 10 years apart.
Okay.
So we were a year every year. So since I grew up with brothers, it was I was a big tomboy. I was
That's
a
what I
big
figured.
tomboy.
My mom is exactly like that.
Yep.
There's 3 boys, and then she was born the
Yep.
first girl,
Yep.
and she was big into sports and stuff.
Yep. So I played all of the sports: basketball, volleyball, baseball. Well, I played baseball with my brothers. I didn't get into softball till later on, but it was it was what it was. It wasn't something you thought about. But it was interesting because I remember one of my friends in high school said to me, he said, "You're going to have a really hard time finding a husband." I'm like, "What are you talking about?" He said, "Because you're going to compare all of these guys to your brothers." And I'm like, "Okay, yeah, what else? Who else am I going to compare them to? I guess my dad," but I was like, "Yeah, I mean, I would think so." So it must have worked out because I got a great husband. So I'm, yeah, I'm not complaining, but yeah.
So obviously your parents helped you along in education, but did your brothers and siblings also contribute towards the right path?
Yeah, one of my brothers, so my oldest brother dropped out of high school. He just, oh my goodness, I don't know. He ended up being a restaurant type person, so he opened up restaurants, and my second brother became an engineer, and so he went to NC State. So he was a senior at NC State my senior year in high school. So I went to visit him and saw the university and everything. And then my fourth brother is a teacher as well. He's a math science teacher. So if I ever had questions in calc, he was only a couple of years older than me, so he would help me with the questions that I had. So yeah, I mean, yeah, without a doubt, it was but and then I had brothers who didn't. Like my oldest didn't go to college. The third one never went to college. He went and did plumbing school at the community college. So it just depended. My parents were always encouraging about getting an education, but they were also open to us just doing whatever our path was meant to be, which was good. I don't think any of us felt like, oh, we have to go do this, we have to go do that, so.
Right. Why did your parents decide to settle in North Carolina specifically?
Yeah, it's weird because there were not very many Hispanics in North Carolina. Yeah. So when they left Cuba, in order to leave Cuba in '59 during the revolution, and to come to the U.S., you had to have someone here.
Right.
So my dad had an uncle in New York, and my mom had an aunt in New York City. And they had started actually seeing each other before they left Cuba. So my mom came out through Jamaica, because you could not come straight to the U.S., the ties were broken. And we've never heard the story of how my father got out. So we knew that he was fighting against the communists, and we knew that he was on the hit list. So he got out. We never heard the story, so I'm not sure. So then they both got to New York, and then they got married in New York, and my dad went to school in Hoboken, Stevens Institute of Technology, got a chemical engineering degree, did a bachelor's and a master's, and started working upstate New York, which is where I was born. And then when I was 3, he got hired at GE in Wilmington. Oh. And so we moved down, and we were there ever since. And then the interesting thing is, I think the bottom 6 or 7 of us were born in Wilmington, but I have one brother. The one who's the plumber is the only one who stayed in Wilmington. The rest of us have all gone out. We're all up and down the East Coast and some a little bit further out. So, and I think the reason he stayed in Wilmington is he loves to fish and he loves to hunt. So if he could do that full time, he would. He just does plumbing on the side to pay the bills. So, yeah.
It's kind of funny. You have a bit of a southern accent, so it's...
You can tell. It's not as bad as it was. I remember when I taught in North Carolina for 4 years, and then I went up to Virginia for 2 years and taught in Virginia. And one of the little girls in one of my classes would sit in the back of the class, and she'd just shake her head. And I'm like, "Janine, what's wrong? Are you not understanding the math?" She'd go, "Mrs. Viego," that was my maiden name, "Miss Viego, you are just so country." So since moving to Florida, my accent's not nearly as bad as it has been.
When you were coming to Florida, did you expect people to have an accent down here?
I expected it to be the South.
Right.
And then I got down here and I realized, and growing up in North Carolina is the one state that has the least amount of Catholics of any state.
Really?
2%.
Wow.
It just never grew. They've expected it to grow through the port of Wilmington, and it never did. Like South Carolina grew with Charleston. They had a lot of them coming in. It just never grew. So I was amazed when I came down here that there were so many Catholic churches, and everyone I met, there were a lot. I was like, whoa. So to me, that was a shock. And then when you meet people, they're from New York, and they're from Pennsylvania, and I'm like, wait, I thought we were in the South.
Nope.
Of course, you got some native Floridians, like I'm assuming you're a
I'm
native, and my children are native Floridians. But yeah, it's just, yeah, it's more like a northern state than it is a
Yeah.
southern state. Yeah, we definitely agree with that.
Yeah, I'm probably going to FSU, and so I
Nice.
told my dad the other day I'm going up to the south.
There you go. There you go. Yeah, you'll be in the Panhandle, so
Yeah.
that'll be a whole different.
I have family up there. They
Different.
have the southern accent.
Okay,
so, yeah.
okay, that'll be a whole different. Yeah, I have a nephew who went to Florida State, so yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know about that drive. Good luck.
Yeah. Well, if I was in Gainesville, it's not much different. 3 to 5
Yeah.
hours. It's still like a commitment.
Yeah,
to
Tony
get.
and Abby both did USF, which thank goodness, but I still hate I-4. Ups, he might be coming into my sweep.
Okay.
But go ahead, you're good.
I'm just gonna do a few wrap-up questions. What was I gonna ask? Oh, okay. So you became an administrator this year. What's your official title?
Okay, I am definitely not an administrator.
No,
No,
okay.
Okay. My title is Guidance Services Professional Teaching, Testing Coordinator. So, no, I'm definitely not an administrator. I don't want that job.
So, what responsibilities do you have as that position?
Basically, I'm in charge of all of the state testing and national testing. So anything that the state of Florida says we've got to test, I do, and then anything that is College Board endorsed, SAT, PSAT, AP, and then ACT is something that Mr. Fleming wanted us to do, so I'm doing that as well.
So, how is that? Do you like that position more than teaching right now, or do you kind of miss teaching a little bit?
I miss the students. I definitely missed interacting and working with the students because that's the best part of teaching. I don't miss all of the paperwork. I don't miss all of the hours out of school. The nice thing with this job is it's an 8-hour job. I can do it 8 hours, and I'm getting paid for 8 hours. Obviously, in May with the AP testing, it's going to be a lot. It's going to be crazy, and I'm sure I'm going to be putting in 50, 60 hours a week. But it's only going to be for 2 or 3 weeks. So I do like the fact that I'm doing 8 hours a day. I've learned a lot, which I like. I've learned a lot more about Excel than I used to think I was pretty good at Excel, but I've learned a whole lot. There's still a whole lot more I don't know. And it's been different. It's been challenging in that I'm learning a lot of new things and not knowing what I don't know. I'd been teaching so long that it was a habit that I kind of knew what I was doing along the way. And it's been some of the frustrating things, like I just had a parent email me this week about AP. She wants her daughter to take an AP exam, and I thought, oh, you should have contacted me back in September, October. So I said, well, I can do it now, but just $98, which is the fee, but an extra $40 late fee, and it's got to be in by March 8th. So it's just a lot of different working parts that I didn't realize
Behind the
were
scenes
there.
sort of stuff.
Yeah, but I needed a change because I had been teaching for 30 years, and Abby graduating was, I guess, what got me thinking maybe I need to do something different. So
What was the process of thinking through that? What made you want to do that?
I was just getting tired. I had been teaching AP Stats for 15 years, and I've been teaching for 30, and I was getting burned out, and I was realizing I was having a harder time relating to the students just because of the technology. I was finding the students are having a harder time talking to each other. They spend more time on their phones rather than talking, and that to me is weird because I grew up obviously without all the technology, but I grew up in a big family and we were always talking, and I didn't even get my kids' phones until they started driving.
Same.
Because I was like, I want you to be a person and be able to relate, and I didn't want them to be influenced by the social media.
Yeah.
And so, that was, And Tony never fought me on it. He was like, okay. Abby fought me tooth and nail all the way until she turned 16 and got her license. I didn't want my children driving without a phone.
Yeah, it's a little dangerous.
So I don't regret not getting them a phone. I think it was good for them.
Mm-hmm.
But they also both can sit down and have a conversation with somebody. And, you know, Tony is more introverted, so he may not want to sit down and talk to someone, but he can and he will when he needs to.
Right.
So, you know.
Miss A was talking about pretty much the exact same thing you were.
Yeah.
She was saying kids now are not really relating to each other and to their teachers as much as they used to. Do you think, obviously technology had a big impact on that, but do you think COVID also impacted that?
Oh, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I did find last year, though, with the seniors that I had, a lot of them were friends with Abby. So I felt like I had a little bit more connection with them than I had with the students the year previously.
Yeah.
So I don't know if this year would have been better or worse based on, you know, I don't know a lot of the senior class this year because I didn't teach a lot of them. So, yeah.
So after COVID, did you have to change anything about the way you taught, or did you kind of just try to go back to normal?
Well, one of the things I really liked, okay, the COVID year was crazy, obviously. It's got to have been one of the hardest years I've had since my first year teaching. But I'll tell you, one of the things that I really liked about COVID is I learned how to videotape what I was doing and put it online.
Right.
So afterwards, after COVID, the next 2 years, if I had a student absent, I'd just tape what I was doing and post it online.
Right.
So I think that was very beneficial to the students who missed, because then they wouldn't get behind. Especially the AP Stat students, they could go online, get the notes, and then if they had questions, come ask. So I think that was one of the really great things that came out of COVID. So I guess there's some good that came out of it.
Yeah. So it's interesting that you felt like you wanted to start doing the testing job because you felt you weren't connecting with the students as well, or the students weren't connecting with each other. So do you think, what's the question? Why do you think this started happening to students? And also, do you think maybe as you've gotten older, you've started to not relate as much to your students? Because I know that's what Miss A was saying.
It could be. You know, I saw Mrs. Gleason come in, and she's like on top of things and doing, I think it's just part of getting old. I'm just like, I just needed something different, and I haven't completely ruled out teaching again. I did teach for a few years at Eastern Florida. I taught 1 or 2 classes, and I may do that again. I don't know. But I was just ready for a change. Part of it is, like I told you earlier, I like growing and I like learning, and I didn't feel like after teaching stats for 15 years that I was growing anymore and learning. Yeah. So I kind of felt like I knew what the kids needed to do. There wasn't a lot new going on there. And I had been teaching Algebra 2 for years. I did teach geometry again last year. And I enjoyed that because that was a little bit different. So I think I was just ready for something that was a little bit different. And I wanted something that I wasn't taking a ton of work home. So it's been nice being able to go home and fix dinner and not have to think about what needs to get done for tomorrow. So I just come in, and there's a lot of moving pieces with AP and SAT and ACT, but I can deal with the little pieces as they go. And I definitely have a lot of lists going on. So, yeah, no, it was good. It's been good.
Nice.
It's been good just doing a change.
So Mr. Fleming and a lot of teachers are leaving this year.
Yes. No.
Are you? How do you feel about that? Are you sad, nervous?
It's hard. It's hard. You get used to having certain people here, you know, and like I said, Rita Galbraith was phenomenal. Mr. Fleming has been phenomenal. Every principal I've had here, I think Mrs. Van Meter was here for 2 years after Galbraith. They've all been phenomenal. So it's just, that's going to be hard. It's hard adjusting to someone new coming in. And it's going to be hard for them to adjust too, but we'll see. The nice thing is we're West Shore and we're flexible
Mhm.
and we're always growing and moving. So I think it'll be good.
Mhm.
It'll be a good thing, but it is going to be hard. It is definitely Mr. Fleming. I've been with him since Abby was born. So
Yeah. Definitely a big character change in the school this year.
yeah. As long as everyone, I've heard several people say, as long as Webb doesn't go too.
Right.
And I said, you know what? I remember when Rita Galbraith and Barbara Rodriguez left, and they made sure Claudia Shirley stayed
Mhm.
because they didn't want to remove everyone from the front office. So I'm going to miss Schledorn. Like I said, he
Yeah.
was right next door to me for a bunch of years. Whitaker, I'm really good friends with Mrs. Whitaker and Mrs. Landmesser. I'm going to completely miss them. And the whole math department, I mean, we were together for like 9 or 10 years.
Right.
And then Miss Milligan left, and it's like everyone's, and then Gornto, and it's just...
It's since I've been here, the amount of like older teachers that were here, and I knew
Yeah.
them because of my siblings.
Right.
The amount of them that have just left is kind of
Yeah.
crazy. It's
Well, Tony graduated in 18, so 5.5 years ago, and just between the time he graduated and Abby graduated, I don't think any of the math department left, but he looked at the rest of the school. He's like, I don't know half of the teachers.
Yeah. So I feel like that too.
Yeah, but that's typical of education.
Yeah.
When I graduated, and this was back in 1990, the math and science ed department graduated. There were 40 some of us. I don't remember exactly how many, but my advisor, Dr. Waters, said half of you will never teach. So of the 40 of us, he said, statistically, only 20 some of us were going to be teaching. He said, and in 5 years, half of you will not be teaching. So, I mean, the attrition rate in teaching is crazy.
What do teachers do, or do they just go to new schools, or do they just stop teaching? Or...
A lot of them stop teaching and just go do something else. I mean, some of them go back to school. Some of them just find different jobs. I mean, as a math teacher, I could probably go to Harris and find something, or go, there's a bunch of different positions. I could go work at a bank. I could go work at an insurance company. So, there's a lot of different positions that are available.
So, are you looking at retirement yet? Have you put in your 5 years, I think it is?
No, not yet, because
Not
when
yet.
I moved from North Carolina, I did 4 years in North Carolina and 2 in Virginia. But when I moved here,
Doesn't
I
transfer.
started all over.
Right.
So those, I've got like pensions there that will kick in when I retire. But then here you got to do 30 years, or you have to get to 62. So this is my 23rd year, so I've got 7 years left to go. So, and then it'll depend on my kids, where they are, what they're doing. It'll depend on my husband too. So we got to get Abby through college. That's the first thing. We got Tony through with no debt.
Nice.
So that's the hope, is to get Abby through. USF has offered her a lot of money, which was good, and they
Nice.
did the same thing with Tony. So if we can get them graduated, I think my husband, when she graduates, is going to go to a reduced work week, and just do 32 hours a week,
Right.
and then we'll go from there. I figured I did part-time for 18 years. Let him go part-time
Yeah.
for a little bit. So, and then it'll depend, because if we have grandkids, that's going to change everything.
Right.
So who knows? Yeah.
Do you have any like specific plans that you and your husband have ever talked about? Like, I know my parents are like, we're gonna buy a camper and go places.
That would be nice. That would be nice to do. We since I have siblings all over the place, with the kids, I would, in the summer, that was another good thing about education, is having the summers off. I would get the kids in the van and we'd go. My mom was in Wilmington, so I'd stop there. That was 10 hours away. I'd pick her up. We'd spend the night, and then we'd go up to, I had a brother in Richmond, still have a brother in Richmond. I have a sister in Baltimore. I have a sister in Pennsylvania. So we'd just go and spend 2 or 3 weeks. And then my husband would fly in for long weekends. And we'd bring a suitcase with us for him, so all he had to do was bring a backpack, and then I have a brother in Chicago, so we would sometimes I would do the Atlanta route. I had two sisters in Atlanta, one in Kentucky, and then my brother in Chicago. So we would do those long trips. So I'm guessing we'll keep doing that.
Right.
My husband wants to do the national parks. We've been to the Grand Canyon, we've been to Yellowstone. So he wants to do some more of the national parks. I'd love to go back and do Europe. I've been to London, I've been to Switzerland. I went backpacking when I graduated high school, me and one of my sisters, and we flew into Paris, France, and then flew out of Lisbon, Portugal.
Yeah.
And we just went 3 weeks and just stayed in the hostels and
Yeah.
got on the Eurorails. We went to Lourdes, which was amazing. We
Mhm.
went to Fatima, which was amazing. And then we went, Barcelona, Switzerland. We went to Geneva. We went to Zurich. So it
Wow.
was, we just went wherever we
Yeah.
wanted to go. And that was that. So that I would like to do some traveling.
That's nice.
But
yeah.
definitely just go visit family since we've
Mhm.
got so many, so
Yeah.
many people to go see.
Is your husband have a big family also, or?
And my husband's interesting because he's one of 3 kids.
Okay.
So he's got 2 siblings. But his mom was one of 7 or 8,
Mm-hmm.
and his dad was one of 8.
Mm-hmm.
So he's got a huge extended family. He's
Yeah.
got a ton of cousins. And it's been sad watching. I mean, it's good, but it's been sad because we've watched everyone die. Because when we got married 25 years ago, we got married in his hometown in High Point, North Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
Because my family had to travel. They were all over the place,
Right.
and he wanted to be one place.
Mm-hmm.
So we've got pictures of all of his family, at our wedding and stuff, but they've all passed away one by one. So Tom's mom was the youngest of 7. She is 89. She's the last one left.
Mm-hmm.
And then his dad passed away several years ago. All of his siblings have passed away except for one. So his sister, Aunt Alice, is still alive. And his Aunt Vera just passed away last year. She was 95.
Mm.
So it's been sad watching them, but it's been great because he's got such a big family. And so, yes, he has an extended family in a different way than I did.
This is a thing in my family where it's really hard to actually have a group photo with all of
Oh,
us.
yeah.
Has that ever happened really since people have left the house in your family?
Yes, at my sister Helen's wedding.
Uh-huh.
When she got married, she 22 or 23 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
she got married and we had everyone there. Now my oldest brother passed away. He was in an accident, so he's passed away. But this past Christmas, we ended up with 7 of us being together in Wilmington, and I mean it came together in a week, which just I still don't know how it happened, but it was fun.
Yeah.
It was fun, and the cool thing is whenever we do get together, the cousins, there's Tony and Abby have got 37, 38 cousins, and it's funny because the siblings will fight. Tony and Abby will fight, but the cousins never fight amongst them.
Yeah.
If anyone's fighting, it's 2 siblings.
Mm-hmm.
So usually people pair off with people their own age or
Right.
whatever, and they get along great. You would think 37, 38 kids, there have been a few times that we've had, not all of them, but a good 28, 30 together. It's just amazing that we can be together for 4 or 5 days and the kids never fight unless it's 2 siblings.
Well,
you
yeah,
know?
they don't know each other well enough to.
Well, Tony made a comment. He said to me, the cool thing about your cousins is even if you don't see them for a year or 2, when you get back together, it's like you never,
Yeah, it's family.
yeah. You were never apart. So, yeah. So that was something that was very important to me, that they formed those bonds. So, yeah.
All right, well, thank you so much.
You're
It's been a great
welcome.
interview.
Dr. Hedrick plans to continue working as the testing coordinator for the immediate future. Her experience with education and management is an important part of West Shore's future. When she retires, she plans on traveling around the world and spending time with her 2 children. Thank you for coming onto the podcast, Dr. Hedrick.